Thank you for being here, everyone. I am just going to make sure everyone here has a copy of the resolution that we handed out during this service, during the announcements. If you don't, raise your hand. I've got some here. Thank you. You are very welcome. Thank you. That would be wonderful. I also have, this is the same handout that we did last week, but I'd like for everyone to be able to have a chance to take a look at it. We're going to use the same opening words and the same community agreements that we used last time, so we're going to start here on the same page, and then we're going to move right into where we left off 2 weeks ago with taking a look at the statement. So, could I get another volunteer to, thank you. I know we've got a lot going on in town and locally this afternoon, so I'm very glad that you could all be here with us today. And actually, can I have, where'd those resolutions go? We'll come back to it.
Mimsy, did you ask for people to bring their cups back when they're done? Yeah. Okay.
Chris, could I get one? No? Thank you. Great. Welcome, everybody, and happy Pride Sunday. So glad that we could all be together for this part 2 of this forum series, diving into the conversation of transgender and non-binary inclusion here at First Parish. Like we did 2 weeks ago when we started this conversation, we opened up with some opening words to sort of ground ourselves together in what it is that we're doing together. So we're going to use those same opening words, and then we'll take a look at our community agreements and go from there. So on the handout that was the same handout that I gave out 2 weeks ago, that just went around, the stapled paper, the front page, you'll find our opening words. And if you're joining us virtually, you can find the handout in the announcements tab of Altar Live. It looks like a little bullhorn. So I invite you now to join with me as we ground into this moment, this covenant that we are going to be making together to have this conversation around inclusion and justice for our non-binary and transgender friends and family. So let's ground into this conversation together with some opening words. We are grateful for the gift of our lives and the gift of other people in our lives. Each of us is created with dignity and worth. We are called to love one another and to do nothing to others that we would find hateful to ourselves. We honor the many ways that people live and love. Our common life is enriched when queer, transgender, bisexual, lesbian, and gay people can come out, sharing the gifts of their sexual orientation and gender identity. True justice flourishes when all people can live and flourish. We suffer when LGBTQ people are oppressed, excluded, or shamed by religious people who overlook the fundamental call to love one another. Love does not exclude. We are all worthy. May we work to build a world where all people are cherished, celebrated, and loved. We celebrate sexual and gender diversity as a blessing that enriches us all. Amen. Well, as we gather together and reflect on these topics of conversation, we recognize that it can be new for many of us. We're all at different points in our journey. We've all been exposed to different sorts of ideas and different communities. And so there might be some discomfort, or there might be some questions and uncertainty. And so we open up this conversation by naming that, by naming the reality of how this can be a difficult conversation. And oftentimes when we have difficult conversations, we open up that time by agreeing to some community agreements of how we will be together as we engage this subject. And so I have here some community agreements that we used last time. One, we will use I statements and speak from our own experiences. 2, we will share time and space equitably. 3, we will lean into discomfort and uncertainty, knowing that that's how we grow. We give each other grace, knowing that the work of living our values is hard and we will all mess up at some point. And we seek first to understand and assume good intent, while also acknowledging impact. If we say or do something that causes harm, we commit to working through it and doing better. When we know better, we can do better. And so I ask you all here today, are these agreements that you feel that we can hold together in this space as we embark on this conversation? Yes. Is there anything that you feel like is missing from these agreements that you would like to bring forth so that you can feel fully present in this conversation? Okay. All right. Let's go ahead and dive in. We left off 2 weeks ago after basically laying the groundwork, which you can see in the handout. If you missed 2 weeks ago, you can see what we covered in that conversation. We opened up the conversation around transgender and non-binary inclusion by really rooting the importance of this work in our identity as First Parish in Lincoln as an open and welcoming community church, and all of the different ways that that is part of what we have called ourselves to be, right, through our covenant and our call to ministry, affirming the dignity of all people, right? We talked about the values and the vision and the mission statement that this congregation has worked so hard to develop over the years, and how this is part of what it means to live into that commitment. We talked about the fact that this is something that has been on our, tagline for so many years. We are an open and welcoming community church. And so this is very relevant to who it is that we say we are, especially in a time when there is a community that is being particularly targeted by legislation all across the country that seeks to isolate, to erase, to make unsafe for a particular group of people. And it's our calling as a people of faith, particularly when that faith has historically been used as a tool to oppress, to say we will not engage in that. In fact, we will do the opposite. We will be intentional in our statements of inclusion, affirmation, and welcome. And so we rooted all of this in our identity of who we are. We also talked about the fact that there was this study done that looked at the youth of a variety of different religions and spiritual communities that are trans or non-binary or gender creative. And they were asked how affirming they felt their place of worship was. They were asked whether or not they knew that their spiritual community would accept them. Only 8% said yes, they knew that their spiritual community would accept them. About 22%, I believe it was, said no, they will not. But the real number that I wanted to look at and remind us all of is there's a whole lot of folks out there, there's a whole lot of children out there that do not know whether or not their spiritual community will accept them when they come out. That's 53%. 53% of trans, non-binary, gender creative children and youth said they did not know. And so my argument and my idea that I put forth is that it's our responsibility as a congregation that claims to be open and welcoming, that this is such a vital part of our identity. We should make sure that our kids know. We should make sure that our kids know that they are loved, that they are affirmed, that they are welcomed in the fullness of who they are, and that they should not be uncomfortable to show up in the fullness of themselves in this space, right? And so we went through a lot of language at that point, which I'm not going to rehash, but we then said, okay, now in light of getting some shared language of understanding around gender identity, gender expression, non-binary, transgender, when all of those terms are in that handout, what might it look like then to live into this commitment to be an inclusive and affirming and open and welcoming congregation for our transgender and non-binary members, friends, family, kids. And there were a lot of good ideas. We're going to come back to that in a moment. But one of the things that we left off on was this resolution. I'm going to give you a little bit of background, which we've already talked about a little bit. When I started at First Parish in 2019, one of the first things I did, as I was getting to know everybody, I asked, can you point me to, first I went to the website and I looked for a statement of gender and sexuality affirmation and inclusion. I looked on the website. I said, where's the policy? What does it mean to be open and welcoming? What does First Parish say out in the world that this is what our statement means? And I couldn't find anything. And so then in my one-on-ones, I had asked a lot of questions, and one was, where's the policy written down of open and welcome to LGBTQ folks? Where does that live in the life of this congregation? Somewhere, someone along the line said, have you taken a look at the bylaws and resolutions? I said, oh, that's a great idea. So I looked it up and found this 1995 resolution, which let's go ahead and read this together. Actually, could someone volunteer to read it out loud so it's not just my voice? Thank you, Sarah.
Resolution adopted at the annual meeting June 12, 1995. Recognizing that lesbian, gay, and bisexual persons are often undervalued and discriminated against in society and in churches, we, the people of the First Parish in Lincoln, affirm the importance of becoming an open and welcoming church, one that values the lives of all people without regard to sexual orientation. We, the people of the First Parish in Lincoln, resolve to welcome to our congregation and our lives homosexual and bisexual individuals, couples, and families. To nurture an ongoing dialogue among persons of differing sexual orientations. To learn to respect experiences and perspectives of homosexual persons in church programs and religious education. To offer full congregational and ministerial support to all persons, regardless of sexual orientation, including celebration of life events such as baptisms, weddings, and memorial services.
Thank you. What a beautiful statement of public witness for this congregation to make, to say we are going to be an open and welcoming congregation, specifically recognizing the harm that gay and lesbian and bisexual folks face. We are going to be specific in naming our intention to be an open and welcoming congregation for this community, and we are going to make resolutions as to how we will live into that. That was a prophetic moment in the history of the life of this church. And I give thanks for the folks that were a part of it. And I actually don't know who was a part of this process of shaping this resolution. But I want to celebrate that it happened and that folks were willing to make that commitment. And the beautiful thing about life is, as we know more, we do better. Right? As we learn more, we continue to grow. We continue to acknowledge that new color of the rainbow. And so what we see now as we take a look at this statement from 1995 is there are opportunities for us to expand and strengthen this statement so that we can be specific about transgender and non-binary folks that are facing particular oppression publicly, in churches, in schools, in just the wider world. And so this is an opportunity for us to make another statement of public witness. It's an opportunity for us to renew this commitment and say, this is how we're now going to live into it. So this statement was drafted by the folks that you see listed here. And let's see, actually, I don't think I might be the only one here right now. I think some of them are online. So, which is absolutely fine, and we welcome, if you're online and you want to make a comment in the chat, please feel free to do so, and I'll make sure to read that out for you. But what I'd like to do now is just to kind of walk through this updated resolution line by line and give folks an opportunity to ask questions. If, as we read through this resolution, you might say, why this phrasing? Or what does that mean? We want to give folks the time, a chance to really understand what it is that this statement is intending, so that we can get a sense as to whether or not this is a resolution that we can collectively as a community say, yes, we put forth this intent. We covenant with the holy and with amongst ourselves to be this kind of church, right? So let's go ahead and read this 2023 resolution now. Let's start with the first paragraph. Could I have another volunteer to read the first paragraph? Thank you, Joan.
Recognizing that lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, non-binary, and queer persons are often undervalued and discriminated against in society and in churches, we, the people of the First Parish in Lincoln, affirm the importance of becoming an open and affirming church, UCC designation, and a welcoming congregation, UUA designation, one that values the lives of all people without regard to sexual orientation, gender identity, or gender expression.
Thank you. So we've got a few snippets there that are different. I want to kind of open it up to the group and invite question, invite comment. What do you notice? What comes up for you as you see these changes? Where are we at collectively when we take a look at the differences that were made in that first paragraph? I see Alice.
I really appreciate the fact that our UCC and UUA connection are distinguished and recognized and part of this paragraph.
Anybody else see that, note that, would like to comment on that? Yes, thank you, Tom.
So does that mean, just to that point, my understanding is with the denominations that there's a lot of structure and expectations and training, etc., that go with that. And is that the expectation that First Parish is going to pursue that, or?
That's a fantastic question. So let's start out by acknowledging that our tagline, an open and welcoming community church, is actually comprised of two key words, one from each of our denominations, that means something in particular when it comes to those denominations. So the UCC has a designation, open and affirming. And if you look around at different UCC congregations on their website, you might see their tagline as an open and affirming community church or open and affirming church. That is the designation officially with the UCC that they have gone through their review of themselves, their self-audit, and taken a look at their relationships, the way they conduct themselves, and put forth a statement and filed the paperwork with the UCC to officially be recognized as an open and affirming church, one that is welcoming and inclusive of LGBTQ folks in their church. That's an official designation. With the UUA, that designation is called a welcoming congregation. At some point since 1995, someone filed the paperwork with the UCC, and we are officially an open and affirming church with the UCC. So if you were to go to, like I do, anytime I'm looking up a church and I'm new to an area, I want to look at churches to go visit, I'll go to the denominational page, their website, and do a search of all the local officially open and affirming churches in my area. If you do that in Lincoln, we pop up. So if someone from the UCC moves to Lincoln, says, I want to know if there are open and affirming churches in my area, they can do a search and we will pop up. At some point in the last 30 years, since 1995, nobody filed the paperwork with the UUA. Understandably so. We had a UCC minister for quite a long time. It was probably, I can understand the feeling of, well, we've done that, why do we need to do that again? However, what that means is if someone from the UU moves to Lincoln and goes to the UU website and looks up a welcoming congregation in their area, we will not pop up, right? So that's a little background for you, Tom. What this then means, the way we phrased it, is similar to the way it was phrased in the first one. We affirm the importance of becoming. that we think that this is an important thing for us to be. A church that is recognized, that is intentional about the fact that we are welcoming and inclusive of LGBTQ folks and families and kids, right? So that is something that we consider important to do. Passing this resolution doesn't mean we've done it. It just means we have affirmed that that's an important thing for us to be. We believe that it's important for us to be open and affirming and a welcoming congregation. Next steps might be to say, okay, what would it take then to file that paperwork with the UUA to recognize that we are a welcoming congregation? Because to be honest, a lot of the things that they look for, we're already doing, right? We've already got a number of pieces of that in play. So that's a later on down the line conversation, and it's not necessarily required by this resolution, but it's an acknowledgement that we do think it's important for us to note that that's what those words mean, and we are setting the intention of living into that, whether or not we're on that website or not tomorrow. You know, does that clarify, or do you have any follow-ups on that?
I think it's important for us as a community to understand what those expectations are.
Absolutely, yes. So with the UCC, we are already, like I say, in compliance. With the UUA, some of those pillars of compliance might be, well, they are, looking at the RE programming and making sure that RE programming is in line with open and affirming standards of affirming people of all different sexual orientations and gender identities and gender expressions. Looking at our liturgy and making movements toward being more inclusive. So it's not like a thing that we check off, we've done it and now we're perfect. It's a, how can we be more inclusive in our liturgy? Well, we could do this or we could do that. So it's about acknowledging where we are and being intentional about taking steps forward to becoming more inclusive. It doesn't require that we do all of these things on a checklist, but it's about forward momentum in different categories like RE, worship, space, physical space, and things of that nature, programming. And we can have follow-up conversations about, do we want to then go forward in that direction, right? Yes, Joan.
I'm very grateful for the committee for doing this and for the work that you're doing. And I thought the service today was so beautiful. It's just an absolute work of art, and the Nate's sermon and just the whole thing.
Yeah.
And I came last week, and I really feel that this is part of our journey to open up our minds and our hearts and to learn. And so at first I wondered about the inclusion of the specifics. And then I believe I'm correct in my thinking that some of it is about who you love, and some of it is about how you identify yourself, how you feel about yourself. And I really do personally want to be inclusive of people about how they feel about themselves.
Thank you, Joe. That's exactly right. So what we see in the key distinction in those two paragraphs, right, is that the first one acknowledges that we want to be a congregation that values the lives of all people without regard to sexual orientation. And this second version adds to the fact that we also want to be a congregation that values the lives of all people without regard to gender identity, meaning how they feel about themselves, their internal identification, whether they identify as male or female or non-binary or somewhere else on the various versions of gender that exist in the world, and acknowledges that people identify not just in a binary of either or, but in a whole range of ways, right? So we would value the lives of all people without regard to gender identity, as well as without regard to gender expression, meaning how I physically present my gender in the world, right? So someone who might visually, you might assume because of social norms, might be masculine or feminine, might actually present their gender expression in a totally different way than what one might expect. And that is their gender expression, right? It is unique and different based off of who they are, how they identify, and how they want to show up in the world. And so, exactly right. So, anything else on that first paragraph before we move on to the bullet points? Great. I'd love to take a look at the first three, and then we'll look at the last three. So I have a volunteer to read the first 3 bullet points. Thank you, Paula.
Verse 3, to welcome to our congregation and our lives LGBTQ plus individuals, couples, and families with open hearts and open minds. To nurture an ongoing dialogue among persons of differing sexual orientations, gender identities, and gender expressions. To offer church programming and religious education for all ages that respects, represents, and recognizes the variety of experiences and perspectives of LGBTQ plus persons.
Thank you, Paula. Anything stand out to you? What do you notice? What do you wonder? What comes up for you as you take a look at the distinctions there, things that were added or tweaked? Yes?
I'm looking at the bullet that would show up as evil.
Yes, correct. So the top half here is what we currently have in place from 1995, and this bottom half is the way it has been adapted as part of a proposal for the church to vote on at the annual meeting.
So given the immense amount of work we've done around race, where is it?
That's a great question. Yeah.
'Cause it's very loaded with references to sexual identity and gender identity.
Absolutely.
It feels skewed to me.
Absolutely. So that's a great question, to remember that we are all the sum of all of our parts, right? We're not, our identities can't be broken up into all these different designations necessarily. And so someone might be a Black lesbian woman, and that experience of her identity is going to be completely unique based off of the fact that she exists in the world as a Black woman, right? And so that is a great question. Sometimes with these resolutions, they do acknowledge race, and they do weave that into the statement. Other times, right? There's so many different ways. Yeah. Other times, congregations feel that for the particular statement of open and welcoming, as it pertains to LGBTQ people, there's a desire to just focus on this for the purpose of this statement. But that is not to say that we don't acknowledge the extreme diversity within the LGBTQ community based off of their race and their culture and their ethnicity and class and all of the different ways that their gendered and sexual identity is impacted by their other identities, disability, right? And so there is a way to go about it that is attending to all of those factors, which is one way to do it. And then there's the way that we're kind of building off of what we did in 1995 to just focus on LGBTQ affirmation in this statement, but we can come at it again in the future if we want to expand the statement to include all those different intersections. But I want to say that particularly when it comes to the phrases open and affirming and welcoming congregation, those designations are specific to saying that you are affirming and inclusive of LGBTQ people. Race and class and other identity factors can be incorporated in other sorts of statements. Or they could be incorporated in this statement.
Do we have anything in our whatever this is called, or resolutions or regulations or whatever, about being open for racial and class? I mean, that might be something we might want to do
Yeah.
in the future.
Yeah,
I have it right here. I just was pulling it up. I could read it if you'd like.
please.
It was adopted in 1963, and it says, recognizing racial injustice as a major social problem, we, the people of the First Parish in Lincoln, reaffirm our faith in the ultimate dignity of all mankind, men and women of every race, welcoming them into the membership of our church, and as part of the service of man, trans all, for which our covenant unites us, we resolve to devote our minds and efforts to the Christian task of correcting racial injustice and helping those whose lives have been burdened and limited for generations by discriminatory treatment. So that was from 1963.
Yes, Yes and amen. Here's a vision that I have for this, of where we're going with these statements. I'd love to be able to get these statements of public witness out into the world in some way. A page on the website which explains to the community of anyone that would like to stop by, what do we mean when we say an open and welcoming community church? Because let me tell you something, as someone that comes from an evangelical context, which is explicitly against same-sex relationships, specifically against the reality of a gender spectrum, and affirming folks of all different identities, we still called ourselves welcoming all the time. You know, and it's on our websites. It was, we'll welcome you, whoever you are, we'll welcome you. And that is not actually the case. And so when folks have these particular identities and have been in faith communities that have called themselves welcoming, but then they come up against all sorts of injustices within that community, and then they decide, oh, I want to try church again. If you don't say what you mean by welcoming explicitly as it pertains to LGBTQ folks, that is a great, I think, disservice to the community, to the folks that could want to be a part of our community. It doesn't honor the statement that we make, that we are, in favor of the dignity of all. And it's a missed opportunity for us to be able to welcome folks of all different backgrounds into our community, because they don't know. How would they know if we don't tell them, right? And so to have somewhere out in the world that statement from the 60s, right? An incredible statement of public witness in a time that was needed, right? From the 90s, another public statement at a time that it was needed, and now for this, again, very relevant to this moment for this particular question. Barbara, and then Sue.
I'm very much in support of this concept, and did, however, go on the website to see not what we said, but what other churches, both UCC and
Yes.
UU were saying. And one thing that I saw was quite common was the compression of a variety of
Yes.
things, including physical and mental disability.
Yes.
Including gender and sexual expression and orientation. It was all, I felt quite comfortable about what was involved in that statement, recognizing I'm not in the position you just described of
Right.
seeking, like a safe place.
Right.
But I'm wondering if there might be some merit in putting it all together. So race and disabilities and class and sexual orientation are all in the paragraph.
Absolutely, and I think it would make sense for that to be all part of one piece of communication. I do think that the benefit, like you say, for kind of bringing this out and being specific with it, is for folks that are going to be looking specifically for this question. So it's not kind of buried in a list, but it's fleshed out in a more coherent way. But I think that you're right.
Let me just add,
A lot of
buried.
yeah. Yes, and a lot of congregations do have it listed in that way. Absolutely.
So there's sort of a question about what we do about this resolution tomorrow, and then one takeaway would be, how do we communicate that through the website and other external features
Right.
as soon as possible, right?
Right.
And so we could pass this, and then we could put something on the website that's actually more all-encompassing, that reflects some of what the church already
Yeah.
passed, right, and voted on, dating back to the 60s.
Right. Sue, and then Carrie, and then Edwin.
Well, this may be a little picky,
Yes.
but in the resolutions, the second one, to nurture an ongoing dialogue among persons of differing sexual orientations, etc. To me, that says we encourage those people to get together and talk to each other. It leaves the rest of us out of it, that, if you don't have differing sexual orientations. So I would suggest something like to nurture an ongoing dialogue that includes persons, or an ongoing dialogue among all of us,
Right.
including, because somehow it's like we're going to get them together to talk to each other, and that bothers me.
I think this is a good point that's something that you see when you read that, because I think it's a really good reminder for all of us that we all have a sexual orientation. we've all got we've all got a gender identity. We've all got a gender expression, and so there's a way I think to what you're saying is to make it more explicit, right, in the language of this bullet point, and also I think that it is there, and that's my interpretation of. We based that bullet off of the earlier bullet from 1995, really just adding gender identity and gender expression to say that we're going to do things like this, you know, and we've all got different gender identities and gender expressions and sexual orientations in this room, and we're nurturing a dialogue about that.
I get
Yeah.
it, and I stand corrected.
Yeah, well-
I like it.
But thank you for bringing that up. That's what this conversation is for. I'm so glad. I'm so glad. Yeah. Carrie and then Edwin.
Sure. I was looking at the third bullet about church programming and religious education, and I was wondering if you were in a spot where you could say something about how they treat these topics at the Lincoln Middle School, the public schools here.
That is such a good question, and I wish Becca were here because she would have much more to say about that. And that was part of the rationale behind bringing together folks from different segments of the congregation, someone from parish committee and someone from deacons and someone from outreach who's also involved in the schools and a young person, so or 20s and 30s. And so, yes, so she would have much more to say, and I would highly recommend you reach out to Becca to get her specific expertise on that. And we have a question from the website, or from the chat, who's asking, why can't all these statements be added to the website? They're an integral part of church history and growth. And then we should add this statement, hopefully to be adopted this year, from Catherine Levin. And absolutely, I agree. I think it's so important for us to bring these statements out into the public and put it on the website. Edwin. Thank you. Thank you.
So I'm in 100% support of all this effort, and I'm really grateful. And I think in '95 when they came with this initial resolution, they really believed trying to be as inclusive as they could.
Absolutely.
And fast forward to now, we have plus and queer and all that. So now we are trying to modify.
Yeah.
So what I'm struggling with is how do we come with a resolution that won't expire next 5 years?
Sure. It's a great question. Yeah.
So I'm tempted to say welcome all, but I understand the prejudices we have where we just casually say all without specifying. But then when we specify, how do we make sure we include all variations, all
Yes,
the branches
yes.
of
Absolutely.
segregated people, you know? So that's
Yeah.
A suggestion.
Please.
On bullet number 2, just change it to something like to nurture an ongoing and inclusive dialogue among persons of all different sexual orientations.
Yeah, just to make it more explicit, right?
And just it would include everyone.
Yeah, thank you.
Previously just 2 words.
Yeah, I like that. And inclusive?
Can you repeat that again, please?
To nurture an ongoing and inclusive dialogue among persons of all different sexual orientations, gender identities, and gender expressions.
I think that would be easily done. Yeah, we could do that. All in favor? I don't know. No, thank you for that. And thank you, Edwin, for bringing this question. I think that does address that, you know, to give it more of that perhaps timelessness to it, that our goal is to be inclusive in our dialogue.
I think it addresses
Yeah.
a couple of the things that are
Yeah. And I want to say that part of the nature of human existence is that we are ever evolving, ever growing, ever shifting. And the statements that we make today will inherently, by the nature of what it means to be human, will eventually not expire, but who we are in 20, 30 years will be different from who we are today. And we will need to take into account the current moment at that time when that arises. And I think being willing to say we want to make this as timeless as possible to really embody our values and be specific for this, but still be specific for this moment. That means that we should be willing to do that again when the need arises again, and again, and again, right? Because growth and change are all part of the nature of spirituality, right? Yes, Sarah, and then Joan, and then Barbara.
I just, in light of what you just said, I wonder whether adding a bullet at the end that's a commitment to continue to revisit
Yeah.
over time might.
I think that's a great idea, and it will also help us to remember that by passing this isn't checking a box, right? This is step one of an ongoing commitment that we are making, a covenant of sorts that we are making together as a community of what we endeavor to be, who we endeavor to be, and then we have to go about the task of living it, right? Of doing it together, right? And so having that extra bullet of we're going to endeavor to engage this process in an ongoing way, to continually grow and become more and more inclusive as time goes on, I think is a beautiful idea. Joan, and then Barbara, and then Alice.
I have, this is going back to the racial thing. I would like to say that in 1963 it bothered me, and it still bothers me today. I'm not a mankind, and I'm not a man. I would feel more included if we could say human or people, which
Parentheses all, that you do it for you.
Yes. So if we could look at some point at the mankind and man, I would really appreciate it. I just read Martin Luther King's book, and it's all man, 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 man.
Yeah.
So I would like to be included as a woman.
And people of all genders, right?
And people of all.
Yes. Yes. And thank you for that. I think that's just a great example of just the nature of what we were just saying, right? That was an incredible statement in 1963, and we look at it now, and things pop up when we realize, oh, there are other ways that we can say that to be more inclusive today. Barbara, and then Alice, and then Adam.
I'm sorry I have to leave early. I'm a little bit overdue now, but I just wanted to throw out for consideration. I found this second paragraph of the bullets just a little bit cumbersome. And I'm wondering if it might be possible to consolidate 2 through 5 and talk about the activities, the programs, the policies, the systems, the educational activity, whatever it is, into a single statement. And then go on with advocacy, which is different, welcoming is different.
Right.
But maybe not fix it drawn out.
Sure. Yeah, I appreciate that perspective that we tried to keep all of the bullets, the 4 bullets that already existed, maybe tweaking some language here and there, and then added 2 additional bullets, one for recognizing church structures and one for advocacy, both which we haven't gotten to yet. But these bullets basically are welcome, dialogue, programming, policy, ministerial and pastoral care, and advocacy. Those are the basic headlines of each of these 6 bullet points. Could they be adapted to be more concise? Absolutely. The goal was, again, to preserve as much as possible from the legacy of what went before while just adding things here and there. But if we'd like to do more editing work, we can absolutely do that.
I would from a process perspective, given that we're trying to get this voted on tomorrow, and a lot of people have already seen this, and I would say, with due respect for the clarity suggestions that Barbara is making, that we should try to focus in here today on matters of either clarity or substance, because I think to rewrite something at this late stage would probably mean we would have to delay it until the fall.
Right.
And I don't think we should delay it to the fall. That's my view, and others may have different views, but I think.
But why?
Yeah.
Why should we not delay it?
I think we've got good momentum, and let's get something done here. And if we want to have another resolution in the fall that writes it a little bit more cleanly, I guess we could do that.
The timeliness of this current moment and what is, going on in the nation would perhaps give some impetus for us to try and pass this and make
And
it
if I'm
make a same
hearing you
arena.
correctly,
Yeah.
it's not that there are matters of error, it's just of
Cleaning up the
style,
language.
right?
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah.
I hear you.
Just consolidated it a little.
I hear you. Yeah.
And the time we're spending on minutia in
Mhm.
terms of editing
Mhm.
should be spent thinking, what are we gonna do?
Right.
Amen.
Mhm. Yes, and amen. Alice, and then Adam, and then Larry.
I want to follow on what Susie just said. I think that I read this as chair of outreach, and I think I would like everybody on the committee to understand these resolutions because they can guide us as we look at organizations. Are we consistent with the organizations we support? Or are there some areas that are unclear? So our due diligence, whether it's for Preston grants, for small grants, for our special offerings, it's really important that we take this the next step.
Thank you, Alice. Adam, and then Larry.
I just, just thinking about along the lines of what Edwin said, I just wonder what the next aspect of the human experience will be in 30 years. I don't know. We don't know. Just a thought.
Yeah.
Stay tuned.
Stay tuned, yes. And what's beautiful about humanity is that that's already existing. Like, just because we in our little corner of the world might not have a particular experience or exposure to a particular experience, there's still so much diversity and uniqueness in the human experience and creation's experience that we don't even know today. But we do the best with what we can, and then we do better when we know better. Thank you. Larry?
I'm quite prepared to vote for this statement exactly as it is, even recognizing that it might be tweaked a bit in certain clauses that represents very careful thought by very careful and deep-thinking people, and I doubt if I could have come up with anything nearly as good. My one concern is more about the translation of resolution into messaging.
Yes.
If this should go in its entirety on the website as 6 bullet points, and at the same time we're trying to message our openness about issues of race, issues of ability, and access, the whole thing should be synthesized in a way, the macro message, so that one ingredient to which we're committed this. It doesn't seem as if it's 85% of all that we want to stand for in the way of openness and social justice.
Absolutely. Thank you for that. And, that is, I think, yes, the next step after kind of taking a look at this and saying, are we collectively in agreement that this is the direction we want to go and who we are and what we want to resolve to be together? And then there's the communication piece. And I imagine a page under the welcoming tab that says open and welcoming. And then on that page, we kind of get into these specifics of what that means to us, right? And this would be part of that, right? That's one way to go about it. We can have a conversation with communications folks and communications experts, perhaps a committee at some point, to talk about what that would look like. Yes, go ahead.
Just for my own clarification, because
Yes.
there is no mention here of racial diversity. Is there a mention of it in some other part?
Yes, there was the 1963 resolution that Chris read earlier, and I think that would be a really important thing for us to get out there on that page as well. Thank you. Go ahead, Chris.
In the line of messaging as opposed to resolution, one of the key points that I recall from the 1995 discussion was, hey, we already have this statement about affirming each person's dignity. That includes all of this. Why do we need to do this? there's a way to turn that around and use it to say, to lead with, we affirm each person's dignity. And here are some of the ways that that's been incorporated historically in resolutions.
Absolutely. Thank you, Chris. It is not, to pass this, it's not to the exclusion of anyone else, but it's to name specifically marginalized, historically marginalized groups and currently marginalized and oppressed groups to say this is what it means for us to be open and welcoming today on this, right? Well, we didn't get a chance to look at the last three. Are there any questions as you take a look at the updated language there that you'd like to have clarified? And then the next step of this, in addition to, you know, coming to annual meeting and voting on this tomorrow, is then how do we implement it? How do we live it, right? And so that we should have another, I think, follow-up conversation about that at another time. But I do want to open up for any last questions about those last three bullets, about structure, about ministerial support and full life events support, and advocacy. No? Well, thank you all for being here and for being part of this conversation. Much more to say, so thank you. We hope that you will join us tomorrow evening in the Parish House Auditorium for the annual meeting where we will bring this to it. Yes?
Is it on Zoom also if you can't be there?
It will not be on Zoom. It will not be on Zoom this time.
I can't cast my ballot in absentia today.
Well, that is a good question. Is there an in absentia opportunity?
The bylaws do not permit it,
Right.
as opposed to the
Yeah.
bylaws don't permit that. And
Okay.
we hope in the future we can have a online version of our annual meeting, but haven't come that far.
Thank you all.
Thanks everybody so much for sticking around.
Yes.